Bizarre.
May have been. I mean, yeah, we've met many times, but I was just trying to think of the very first time. I mean, Tom was a hero of mine when I was a kid for his music and for his... I mean, for me, music's always been about language, and Tom Robinson is one of the people, for me, who perfectly epitomized how you use music as a language to convey ideas and feelings, and how you have a symbiotic relationship with politics and society. And Tom was one of the most inspiring figures of my early years. So it's such a pleasure to be here, interviewed by Tom.
So those early years took place in Rochester, of all places?
Yeah, that's right.
What was it like growing up in the 70s in Rochester?
Oh my God. Well, actually, the 70s in Rochester was... it's very picturesque. It's got a castle and a cathedral and a beautiful river. Other than that, it was mainly a lot of skinheads and National Front and a lot of... I mean, I was basically the only... I sound like that guy from Little Britain, but I was the only Asian kid in my school. And it was, it was a difficult time to grow up there. But
I bet.
Yeah, it was, I mean, you'll remember those days when there were, kind of bother boys on all the streets, and, there was this whole kind of attitude towards anyone who was Asian or black, that was quite hostile. It's a strange time to be talking about that again, because there is, I do genuinely believe there's a resurgence of that. But it was also inspiring for music in a way, because I ended up just being quite isolated and writing a lot of music in my room. So and watching a lot of films and getting into the idea of music as a language.
So from the get-go, music as part of cinema, music going with pictures, was an integral part of what got you going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, my heroes when I was young were people like Bernard Herrmann, who wrote all the music for the Hitchcock films, and Ennio Morricone, who did all the spaghetti westerns. But it was people who really, could take classical forms or even avant-garde forms of music and really find ways to marry visual images with sound in a way that really gave you an immersive experience, and that's really what inspired me when I was young.
Except that most people who go for composition as a route, and particularly film composition, are reasonably kind of focused, whereas you seem to be
distracted,
completely omnivorous. So you started on what? Flamenco classical guitar? Yeah,
and well, no, I started on classical piano actually, and I played with the youth orchestra when I was. By the time I was 11, I did all the grades. I did grade 8 at 11, and I was playing flamenco from the age of 8. But then I was in a punk band, a rock band, a funk band. I was in a jazz quartet when I was 11 or 12, and then I was just playing all kinds of things. I mean, the thing was that it was just, for me, I was just excited by music.
But Indian classical music as well?
Yeah, I played tabla at a nearby... Tabla is an Indian classical percussion instrument, again, North Indian. And it's an instrument which actually has quite a lot of mathematics behind it. It was interesting just talking to Ravi, who we'd never met before today. He studied mathematics at university, and I was very inspired by mathematics and the relationship with music. So tabla gave me a lot of that as well, because tabla is very much about understanding complex time cycles and so on. So yeah, that was something I got into. And
then you, in your studies, did the mathematics kind of... Did your parents tell you to get a real job, as most musicians get?
Absolutely. Well, I studied law originally, and then I ended up at Liverpool University, and then I ended up qualifying as an accountant of all things. And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? So I kind of left my job, and God knows how many years ago now, nearly, I think, 28 years ago, something like that. And I've been playing music since.
That's not normally a kind of obvious career path in terms of being able to put bread on the table and pay the mortgage and everything. So what was it that made it possible for you to just leave accountancy as the reserve occupation and not have to go back to it?
Well, a mate of mine who was also from Rochester, who I'd been in a band with, called James Taylor, who people might know of. He's got a band called JTQ. They were kind of like a funk band and very popular a few years ago. He just said, "Do you want to join the band and come on tour?" So I went on tour with him, and I was playing kind of wah pedal guitar, and just kind of, we were doing a lot of covers from the 70s, and I ended up doing that.
Wow. But yeah. and the punk and the funk and all the rest of it?
Well, it's kind of weird because I suppose a lot of that feeds into things that I like and things that I started to do as well. I mean, it certainly informs the kind of lyrics that I wrote since, and the idea of having a symbiotic relationship with politics and society, which I think is really important. I think that's one of the things about writing for natural history. I watched, I should imagine quite a few of you were at the Chris Backham, Sir David Attenborough talk earlier, and I think it's very important that music has a strong sense of awareness, or musicians do, about the context they're in, and that you can't ignore that if you're a musician. It's very important to make music that's inspired by everything around you, not just by your own ego. And so I kind of think it's something that I kind of found inspiring with what they were talking about as well.
Trying to condense a 28-year career into a 5-minute introduction is always going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's fair to say that 1999 saw a kind of breakthrough for you with a Mercury-nominated album.
Yeah, well, Beyond Skin, I made an album called Beyond Skin, which was nominated for the Mercury Music Prize, and that was really exciting because it was quite funny. That got actually nominated in 2000, but in 1999, Talvin Singh, who was a guy I'd been in band with for 2 years, he won the Mercury Music Prize, and it was strange because it was kind of a time when a lot of people could see possibility. It's difficult to talk about this without kind of some kind of casual reference to what's going on now in terms of the perception of immigrants. And I think at that time, it was pre-9/11, there was a sense of excitement at what multiculturalism represented. And I think multicultural Britain, for me, felt like a genuinely exciting place full of possibility. And I think things have shifted over time. I'm not going to go too much into that, but at that time, it just felt very exciting. And so I made an album called Beyond Skin, which is self-explanatory in terms of the title. But it was very much about my experiences with identity, nationality, and I suppose even thinking about issues like religion as well.
And then, not long after that, we find you composing for the Britten Sinfonietta.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
Kind of moving into traditional, what
classical.
We might think of as traditional contemporary classical music.
Yeah.
And then 2003, you do a Channel 4 TV series that gets you an Ivor Novello nomination.
Oh, that was, Second Generation, that's right.
Yeah.
So that was interesting because there'd been this thing in the 90s, which was, they called the Asian Underground, which was a weird thing because I remember there's a guy who's a journalist called James Dellingpole who came from the Telegraph. He came to interview me. And he said, and there were a few of us in the room, and he said, how do you feel about being the leader of the Asian Underground, which sounded like some kind of resistance movement. And I kind of said, I don't know anything about that, but I just play music. And he got so riled by the fact that I wouldn't take his label that he actually switched off his tape recorder and said, you're being really obnoxious. You've got a real chip in your shoulder. And I said, I actually haven't. I'm just saying I don't feel I represent anything like that. I just do what I do. And he said, don't you realize I'm here to help you? And I said, I thought you were just here to interview me for the paper. And he got really upset. And it was interesting because at that time, people were really desperate to put labels on you. I mean, I remember when I did get nominated for the Mercury Music Prize, I went into Tower Records, as was then. And I went in, and 11 out of the 12 Mercury nominations were all together. But one of them wasn't there, and that was mine. All of them were racked together. So you had all of them there. And I asked a guy, who was serving, why my record wasn't actually racked with the other music, and he said, "Well, that's Nitin Sawhney, he sells out world music." And I said, well, there's a rock album there. There's all kinds of different albums there. Why not his? And he got really annoyed and just went, he sells out world music, and stormed off. And it's just that kind of thing that I used to just come across all the time. It's very difficult to just break through that. And I remember thinking, you've got a big job ahead to actually punch through a lot of that prejudice. It's very difficult.
And that led to a kind of interesting paradox, because your position for the Asian network on the BBC is ambivalent, because in some ways it's great that music is being supported, but in other ways it's also pigeonholing it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why when I had a radio series, I was very lucky to actually have my own radio series called Nitin Sawhney Spins the Globe, and that's why I said, because immediately people were saying, well, let's put you on the Asian network, and I said, well, actually, I don't want that. I'd rather, if I'm going to do this, I want it on radio too, because for me, it's about integration and not ghettoization. There's a lot of musical apartheid in terms of Asian, or, I don't want to harp on about this because it sounds like I'm phenomenally ungrateful about a lot of things. And, I've been very lucky with my career, but I think if I were to look at what happens, there is not a representation of the demographic of this country on radio or television. That's just a simple fact. And so it was very important to me to try to challenge that a little bit.
Let's fast forward now, because through the 2000s and the early noughties, commission after commission comes through. You're phenomenally busy. I mean, it makes me dizzy just reading your Wikipedia page. But we get to a landmark at 2011, because that's when Nitin Sawhney kind of goes mainstream with a major TV series. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But can we first play a little clip, just as a reminder, a clip from the opening titles of Human Planet?
Cool.
Now, that was a huge undertaking.
Right, yeah. So that's the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Because, okay, I don't know how, would you mind just putting up your hand if you're a musician or a composer? Okay, so a few of you. So what was asked of me was, if somebody asked me now, I don't know how I managed to kind of do this, but it was, I was asked to write 50 odd minutes of orchestral score per week for 8 weeks consecutively. So that's like writing 8 albums in 2 months of orchestral work, and I orchestrate my own work. So it meant I had to sit there and write every part out for the orchestra with director's notes. There were 4 different directors. There was a series producer. Each director was directing 2 episodes. They all want their episodes to be the best episode, which is fair enough. But then on top of that, you've got to brand the whole thing. There's an identity to the entire series. And you also have extensive director's notes, because sometimes you'd be composing something literally with a director right next to you, or the series producer right next to you, and so it was crazy. I had pneumonia afterwards because there was no time. There was literally, it's an insane undertaking. I normally take a couple of years to make 1 album, but to do an orchestral score per week of that magnitude, and then to go and record it with the National Orchestra of Wales at the end of each week was pretty insane. So that's literally the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I can't imagine anything more difficult. I still don't know how we managed to pull it off, but it was, there were 400 separate pieces of music at the end of it. So that's pretty mad. Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah.
So what led you to say yes? Given
insanity in retrospect. No, it's such an inspiring series. Anyone, I don't know how many of you might have seen the Human Planet series, but some of you maybe have been involved in it, given that it's in Bristol. But it was incredible. It was a program that was everything that represented everything that I admire. About program making. It was a program about human resilience and diversity across the world, and really showing the possibilities of the human race. And it really challenges the concept of what is true development. You know, I remember when I went around the world in 2001, and I went and met people like Nelson Mandela and interviewed him in his house, and I met Aboriginal Australians in Australia and so many interesting people. And at the time, I was questioning what was the idea of the word development. You know, we talk about the developed world, but you know, it's quite a glib kind of perception of that in a way when we just talk about it in terms of technology and so on. For me, true development is something much more spiritual and so much more interesting. And I guess this program really represented a study of human development that was going against that kind of mainstream thinking.
I wonder if we could just sort of drill down a bit into one particular episode, take an episode and find out what the mechanics of thinking about it involved, and have, we've got one in particular that was, and they were all unique, but the one when you went to the Arctic,
oh, yeah.
I think was pretty amazing. We've got a clip, I think, from that as well, haven't we?
So you can hear there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of detail.
There's a lot of detail.
Yeah, it is exhausting doing all. You have to write every single note for every single moment and every change, every shift in mood. You know, everything that happens with each creature, and you know, it's a very time-consuming task, but really enjoyable as well.
For those people who put their hands up as being musicians in the audience, I mean, how do you even begin when you're faced? You've just got footage, and you've got a blank piece of paper. What on earth do you do to start?
Well, I've got a score here, so which is actually in the Sainsbury's bag. Hang on, let me see if I can find it. Excuse me. But it's kind of like, basically, you've got to have, you're putting together something that an orchestra can read at the end of it. So this is for something I did recently. And it's kind of, you know, you're aiming for something that a conductor can read from at the end of it. So and it's, you know, it's got to be fully scored out. So you've got each of the musicians in the orchestra able to have their own parts, and they can read perfectly in time and synchronization with everyone else. So in order to do that, and that's also got to synchronize to picture. So in order to do that, I use computers, because it's not going to be easy otherwise to get that level of synchronization. So just to go through it very quickly, you have the movie as a QuickTime video that you incorporate into a program that I use called Logic. In Logic, I will mock up the sound of an orchestra using virtual instruments that I kind of use. Normally, I use native instruments because it's quick. There are a lot of better programs that actually sound more realistic, but to get across an idea, native instruments is very good. And then subsequently, you take whatever you've scored, so you have to score it for each of the instruments in Logic, and then from there you have to transfer it across to another program that I use currently, Sibelius 7. And within Sibelius 7, you actually then renotate it and turn it into something that is legible as score for an orchestra and for a conductor. Then you have to get that back once you've recorded with the orchestra to mix it in 5.1 surround sound, and also to integrate it with electronic programming that you might have done to accompany it. So the stuff that you've heard there hasn't got any real electronica in, but a lot of the stuff I do has. So it's a process, and you, all the while that you're doing that, you will have directors giving you notes, revising what you've done, and saying, we don't like this, and so on, and you have to adjust it. You've also got to brand the whole thing. So it's about feeling what comes at you. And so you're looking at images, and I'm very fortunate in that whenever I look at an image, I can hear music. I hear music straight away to whatever I look at. Even in this room, I can hear something I can write to things, and so it feels like conversation to me. You know, when we're talking, we don't struggle for words because we have something to say, hopefully. And it's the same thing, I think, when you're scoring for film or anything like that. You're inspired by beautiful visuals. They give you the information to work with, and so that's pretty much.
Do you inevitably start with a keyboard, or do you sometimes compose on other instruments?
I sometimes start with a percussion instrument, a voice. It can be a keyboard, it can be a guitar, and it could be something purely conceptual in your mind, just that you hear in your head while you're looking at images, which I love doing. I just love watching film which has got nothing on, which is why I do a lot of silent movies scores as well.
Yes.
It's wonderful when you have nothing there and you're just working to that.
And when you were dealing with the Arctic there, and those snowy wastes, and also that quite brutal thing of hunting down the narwhals, because it's them or us kind of thing.
Yeah.
Was there a kind of motif that you were working towards? Did you have a theme that you were pursuing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can hear a reiteration of the main theme in there, but there's also, it's interesting because you have to bear in mind with this, you know, it's different to making an album because an album is purely cathartic and expressive. But if you're making music, if you're being commissioned to write music for film or for television, you're communicating to a large audience. So within this context, you want to, you know, there's a kind of a good feeling about it. It's kind of it's playful. You know, if you look at the animals there, and you get a sense of what's being said and what's going on, there's a playfulness that you want to get across in the music, and so it's actually also about controlling mood and emotion. It's very complicated to do that, and to actually try to manage that during the course of a program, because you are really, music is the language of mood, and so you're constantly setting the mood of what's going on. So you could score that in a much darker way, but again, that would alienate the kind of audience that they're attracting. This is a mainstream BBC program, so you have to bear that in mind.
With all the franticness of it, though, given that it was such an astonishing project, was there, at what point were you able to actually finally go, God, I really enjoyed that? Or
when I saw the series, I mean, it's such a beautiful series. I mean, whoever's seen the Human Planet series, it's genuinely stunning. And I think, you know, when you have those images of the diver who's on the bottom on the ocean bed, who's walking along, spearing, you know, fish for 5 minutes, you know, incredible. It's so inspiring to watch. And you just think, wow, I'm so lucky to be writing music to that. Or, you know, there's so many moments in the series that really make you take your breath away. And so I was very lucky. Incredible, you know, you saw those beautiful scenes. And so no, it's such a pleasure to do it, even though it's pretty knackering.
Talking of knackering, I mean, you have just flown in from Los Angeles, specially to be here tonight.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
You know, and you're jet lagged and all the rest of it, but you managed to pack all this stuff in. What were you doing in Los Angeles?
Oh well, I was working with a musician called Ginger Shankar, who's a great Indian violinist. She plays something called the double violin. But I was also meeting with I've got a Hollywood agent, so I'm scoring a Warner Brothers film, which is called Jungle Book. You've got the Disney one that's just come out. This one's come out in 2018.
What's the difference going to be with this one?
It's a lot darker. Andy Serkis has directed it. It's got Christian Bale and Benedict Cumberbatch and Cate Blanchett and Naomi Harris, and incredible cast. And it's going back to the Rudyard Kipling original as opposed to the kind of Disney-fied version of it, which was great. I saw earlier this year, but it's very different to that. It's kind of Andy Serkis people will know from his work with Planet of the Apes and also Lord of the Rings. He was Gollum in Lord of the Rings, and he's directed this, and it's stunning what he's done. I was in South Africa with him, musically supervising scenes with villagers who are dancing and miming to some of the music, and he took me. He said, "Do you want to go for a nature walk?" And I said, "Yeah, I really fancy that. It'd be great." Thinking it was going to be a bit like Kew Gardens, and he kind of he said, "Oh, you might need different shoes," and he gave me these massive hiking boots. And then 7 hours later, we were still hiking up a mountain with thick foliage. It was like pitch black. We had about three or four calls saying, "Should we send out a search party?" I had a scar down my leg from. I mean, it's literally, the guy's a mountain goat. I mean, he was like, he mountain climbs like twice a week, which he neglected to mention, and so I was kind of trailing him a lot of the time. But he's an amazing person, and I think that will come through in his work as well.
In the original Jungle Book, I think Mowgli goes back to the village and is driven out again.
Yeah.
Because he's a wild thing that can't be settled in, which is quite different from the Disneyfication of, and the animals all wipe their eyes as they see the little boy go back to the village.
Yeah.
So that's
incorporated in this? Yeah. Yeah. So it's much more close to that visceral, dark energy of the original Rudyard Kipling book, but it's also got Andy Serkis's very powerful kind of dark perspective on things as well, and it feels like it's an immersive experience in that respect. And
presumably, it being Hollywood, you've got a decent budget, orchestras.
It's brilliant. I mean, you get 3 weeks with an 80-piece orchestra at Air Studios, which is amazing, and you get great budgets with that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm very fortunate in that respect.
Now, in 2014, you worked with the BBC again, but this time it was BBC Two. And talking of budgets, the big orchestral budgets weren't there for you, but it did get you a Royal Television Society award.
Which was great, because I mean, essentially it was just me sitting there with a keyboard, which was really lovely. But it was interesting. In fact, we've got Paul Bradshaw, who's the series producer over there. I'm not just saying this because you're here. It was a gorgeous series, and it was. It's interesting because originally I thought it was going to be an electronica score mainly, so I kind of had one perspective on it, but then when I heard the temp score, a lot of it was Hans Zimmer from Batman, I think. And so I was kind of thinking, oh my God, how do I make... But part of the challenge of it was to try from a keyboard without orchestra to try and get sounds across that sounded quite orchestral.
We haven't told the audience what that series is yet. So why don't we roll some VT to show them the opening titles?
Sure.
Wow.
Actually, applause for Paul Bradshaw, who was the series producer, which is a fantastic series.
You see, when you've done the human planet and all of human life is there, you think, well, where could they possibly take it from there? How on earth can you find a new series? And yet you just take one look at that trailer and you go, bloody hell, that looks even better.
Yeah, it was a great series. I loved doing it, and it was, and I think there's, again, the challenge is doing. I mean, I'd come from working with an orchestra for the previous series, and so literally, I'm just there with that. All of that was me on the keyboard.
Really?
Yeah, all of it. Yeah, so it's quite mad trying to replicate that kind of size, but you have to do it. And but it was incredibly enjoyable, it's stunning, very inspiring series.
Now there's the pictures are already there and the proposition is there and the music is there. Obviously, we look at it; it's eye candy. We really want to watch it. But when it's just pitched at you as words, what was it that appealed to you? And what was the actual proposition when they just said it in words to you first? Actually,
Paul had written a beautiful treatment, and it really was gorgeous. I mean, it was the words were so inspiring in themselves. I mean, they're so beautifully descriptive, and you really felt like you were there with a lot of the images. He's very eloquent, and the feeling I got was pretty much what was realised in the final thing. I mean, there wasn't any sense of oh, this is a totally different world from the one that he conjured up within his initial treatment. It felt very consistent and continuous. So yeah, it was a great treatment from Paul.
Did you do the whole score on your own, or did you involve?
I got in a couple of vocalists. I got in at one point a string quartet or quintet. I brought in a few different instruments, but they would be in my studio. I'd record them just to enhance certain scenes as well. And
for the South Asian scenes, did you bring in any kind of Indian musicians or? Yeah, I mean, I brought in, for example, there's quite a few scenes with the wonderful bansuri player, which is a North Indian classical instrument like the flute. It's a guy called Ashwin Srinivasan who plays beautifully, and also Nikki Wells, who's blonde and blue-eyed and from London, but has the most stunning voice and is capable of singing in an Indian classical style. So she actually accompanies some of those moments. Do you have a way of summing up what the results were? I mean, if somebody said to you, what was your score like? It had to be epic and grand, and it also had to be evocative of the incredible cinematography. I mean, it's up for a cinematography award this evening at the Panda Awards, and so the cinematography, the scale of it, I mean, that's the thing. It demands a grand score, and you know, that was a thing that I really wanted to get across, and I think, but at times there are intimate scenes in it, but you need to be able to capture the scale, and I think. You know, nowadays it's interesting with drones and so on. People can get great aerial shots, and you know, but I think, you know, when you do have these incredible epic landscapes, it's important to be able to have the music rise to that as well. So we're here at Wildscreen, and the focus is specifically on wildlife. And a dialogue, if you like, between conservationists and people who make creative efforts. And I think your latest project that comes out next month is absolutely bang in the centre target for that. Yeah. We can't show anyone VT because Sky Arts have got it under wraps and none of it is being released. But it's the Animal Symphony. Yeah, that's the working title at the moment, but that's what... So the brief was to write music that felt like it had... that it captured the animal relationship or animals' relationship with sound and whether they... and question whether they actually derive pleasure from music. I mean, there were lots of... The brief was kind of quite amorphous in a lot of ways because it was... it changed a few times. I mean, essentially, though, I think it was really about looking at animals' relationship with sound. When we talk about animal relationships with music, we're anthropomorphizing them, I think, because we, in a way, I mean, music's a human construct, but animals have their own version, I guess, of music, and they have their own... I mean, for example, the whole concept of consonance and dissonance within music. Animals, chimpanzees, for example, they have a similar part of the brain, oscillatory phase lock, where they will respond uncomfortably to dissonant intervals. So for example, semitone clashes and so on, they feel really uncomfortable with in the same way humans do. So they've evolved the same responses to music in some ways. And at one point, Chris Packham, who's also, he was presenting the program, he took me to listen to, for example, a nightingale in the forest, and we kind of, you know, we listened to that together and talked it through, and then I had to write something that captured the feeling of nightingale and some of the ways in which a nightingale would sing. But also you have animals like Snowball, the cockatoo, or Ronan, the sea lion. Ronan would actually bob her head up and down in time to Boogie Wonderland perfectly. You know, and it didn't matter what tempo you played it at, she would do the same thing. It's called beat entrainment. So there's a whole branch of study called zoo musicology, which actually gets into the kind of relationship that animals have with sound and music, and that was really the kind of
thing that inspired the symphony that I've written for the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. So we filmed and recorded that recently, and there's a whole documentary about it.
Have you had personal experience, like, you know, a dog that but didn't like a particular piece of music that you played, or did?
Well, it's funny because a friend of mine who played harmonica on some
Dogs
of my...
don't like harmonicas.
Yeah, well, actually, this dog loved it. It would help. But you see, you don't know if it's howling from sheer pain, but she would get really excited whenever he played the harmonica, and he played harmonica on one of my albums, and she used to get really, really into it. But there are different theories about that. I mean, one of the theories is that some of the harmonic overtones of the harmonica may actually induce the dog to respond in that way, because she's thinking she's hearing the sound of howling in the distance, and she's howling with the other dog. So there's all kinds of theories about why that happens. We, of course, we anthropomorphize. When we see an animal responding to music, we think, they're enjoying the music in the same way we do. But of course, they may have totally different reasons. Animals use sound for reproduction, communication, and survival, whereas we use, we'll organize sound differently for our own pleasure. And maybe animals get pleasure from it, but who knows?
So in this City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra film, did the orchestra actually play two animals?
What
Put
happened
animals
was,
in the audience?
No, because they thought that would be more difficult to film. But what they did, although I've had animals in my, never mind. But they actually they filmed. For example, they recorded the orchestra playing one thing that I did to get another response from Ronan, and also they played it to Snowball as well, and also to some starlings, and they got responses from all of them. They wanted to do that partially, but also, like I said, some of it's impressionistic, because if my brief was only to get responses from animals, it wouldn't be pleasurable to the human ear, because I'd just make sounds that were going to, in frequencies that get responses. So it had to be a combination of being impressionistic, but also, scientific as well. I mean, I don't know if anyone's read, there's a brilliant book I'd recommend to anyone called The Great Animal Orchestra by a great author called Bernie Krause. And in this book, he talks extensively about the biophony, the geophony, the biophony, and the anthrophony. And he divides the world of sound in that way. So there are, the geophony is when you get the sound of ocean waves or rain and so on, sound of leaves. Actually, it wouldn't be leaves, because that's biophony as well. But you get, he divides it up so that there's the natural world of sound that comes from animals, which is the biophony, and the anthrophony, which is our concept of music. So it's very neatly done, and he breaks all of that down through anecdotes and through scientific research. And
having talked about making music that gets a kind of positive response from animals, I guess it brings us full circle to where we started this conversation, which is making music that gets a positive response from human beings. And Billy Bragg's famous line, "Mixing pop and politics, he wonders what the use is. I offer him my embarrassment and usual excuses." Do you think, ongoing from here, there's a place for you mixing politics with your music?
I don't know how not to. I mean, we respond to everything in society. I mean, at the moment, it's always a weird time, though, isn't it? But I only make an album if I feel I've got something to say. But I think it's very hard to ignore some of the xenophobia that's going on right now. I think there's a lot of political opportunism on the back of what's happened with Brexit, whatever the rights and wrongs are of Brexit. There have been changes, I think, in mood and atmosphere, which I think if you are Asian or if you're from an immigrant heritage, you are sensitive to. So I think all those sorts of things do concern me, but I don't just make music about coming from, about my heritage. I also think about my context all the time. So there's a lot to always say, in the same way there is, like I said, in conversation.
Well, with Dystopian Dream, which was the last album you made last year, it addressed obliquely and directly a number of those themes, but then of course Brexit has kind of exceeded your wildest predictions on that front. Do you think music can actually make a difference, though? I mean, you understand why you would make that in response, as an emotional response to something that you've perceived and have experienced. But can it actually, in the same way that the animal music has affected the animals, do you think music can actually affect the world for the better?
I think that's one of the most ironic questions coming from you that I've ever heard, because Tom, being a humble man, wouldn't say. But I mean, for example, he changed perceptions. He changed homophobia through his music. He actually challenged it through his music. He's challenged racism through his music. He's one of the most inspiring figures in terms of changing perception through music. So for you to ask me that is an incredible honour, but it's not. But there's also people like James Brown with the Black Civil Rights Movement. Who Public Enemy. A lot of people who actually challenge perceptions and create soundtracks to what's going on. I mean, Rock Against Racism was a great example of that. So I do think and challenge xenophobia. So I think definitely, of course, and
my take on that is that it wasn't so much that Rock Against Racism changed the world, but I think it provided a soundtrack to the ordinary people, the individuals who were in those crowds at those gigs, who then went out and changed the world on a one-to-one basis, rather than National Front skinheads turning up and seeing the light. I think it was more that people then argued with them at school, at work, with their parents or whatever.
But either way, incredible.
Wow. We've got just a minute left of our time, but while we were setting up, somebody handed you that guitar there, and you just made everybody's jaw drop on the floor just with about half a minute worth of flamenco flourishes. Do you think you might just finish the session with music and just give the audience that same little thrill that we had while we were setting up?
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. This is actually, I wasn't expecting this, because this is from Paul Bradshaw, who the series producer of Wonders of the Monsoon. So it's his guitar. Now, normally, and he's a brilliant classical guitarist, really good. And so I'm not actually, my nails are all over the place, so I'd probably not. Okay, thanks. So let me see, and my hands are also quite cold, so I don't know. I'll try and play you a bit of Heresica Latina. So this is a Baccapeña piece. So I'll play you a bit of that. Oh, it's a little bit out of tune. Oh. Sorry about this. Okay.
Thank you so much, Nitin Sawhney.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you. Thank you.